I thought that we really needed some not obvious casting for this Freud, because this was not, your grandfather's Freud, which is to say, it wasn't the grandfatherly, sick, stern old Freud that most people think they know. But this was a 50-year-old, very dynamic, charismatic leader of a sort of very intense group of people who were doing some revolutionary things that were considered revolutionary at the time, and very dangerous and very subversive and volatile. And I thought, this is also a guy who was described in the literature of the time as masculine, handsome, charismatic, charming, witty, funny. All things that we don't think of as Freud. But he was all those things. And of course, if you read him, you see that he was all of those things, and funny. He's very funny in his writing, especially in his letters. So I thought it would take a little sort of slightly oblique, non-traditional kind of casting. They were experimenting with it. They didn't really know what the boundaries were. For example, when Otto Gross says, well, maybe it's a good thing for us to have sex with our patients. Who says it's not? Maybe therapeutically it's actually okay. At that point, the ethical boundaries had not been established, and the realities of what that relationship was were not known. So they were very obsessive about observing themselves. When Freud wrote Interpretation of Dreams, the dreams he was talking about were his own, because he didn't have subjects who were divulging to him yet their own dreams. So he used his own dreams as his subject. So likewise with Sabina, she would, I felt, having plugged in totally to this sort of obsessive psychoanalytic state of mind, would be observing herself. Even while she was having sex, she would be observing herself, how she felt, what her reaction was, what Jung's reaction was. Because you see the way we played that, Jung is not really enjoying those moments. He's doing it for her. I mean, and he would be observing it too from a sort of clinical distance. Seriously, I don't think about my other movies when I'm making a movie. It's as though I'd never made one, seriously, other than that I have the craft of having made them. But I don't really try to connect each project with other projects in the way that a critic does. And I sometimes have to remind critics that my process and theirs is not the same.
Yeah.
These connections, these analyses, they don't give me anything creatively to help me make this movie, whatever it is that I'm working on. So I actually forget all that other stuff. Certainly, sex as a subject, I'm hardly the first, I wish I could take credit, but sex and death, the Greeks were doing it 3,000 years ago. So these are enduring, continuing concerns of a dramatist. I mean, after all, George Bernard Shaw said, conflict is the essence of drama. And so we are looking for conflict, whether it's psychological. It doesn't have to be physical violence, but you don't have the drama without conflict. So that's really, and there are many things going on in this movie besides sexuality, although they certainly talk about sex a lot, no question about it. But that was an issue for Freud and Jung, his basing a lot of his theory on sexuality. And that was very revolutionary for the time, because it was a very, what we would call a Victorian era in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Middle Europe before the First World War. It was it was very stable, very controlled. They really felt that everyone knew his place, and that they had achieved a kind of incredible level of European sophistication and civilization. And they felt that man had really evolved nicely from sort of animal to super sophisticated human. And here was Freud saying, well, that's all very well and good, but underneath the surface, and not very far underneath the surface, are these forces which we have in us still, and we have to acknowledge them. One of them is sex, but it's not only sex. It's tribal hostility, tribal violence. His words were not welcome. People didn't want to think about that. They didn't want to hear those things. And then, of course, World War I proved that he was completely correct. I mean, it's hard for us to realize now how shocking the First World War was to idealists at the time, who thought that man had really now achieved an incredible plateau of, civilization. they couldn't believe that in the center of Europe would be all this tribal barbarity, massacres, genocide, hideous atrocities. We're a little more cynical about it now because there have been so many wars since then, but at the time it was a real crushing blow to idealists who really thought that there was a chance that evolution actually meant getting better. Because Charles Darwin didn't think of evolution as getting better. It meant being different to adapt to your environment, but he wasn't thinking of it as, and didn't conceive of it as being something that we were evolving to something better, that we were becoming angelic as opposed to human or anything like that. So all of those things were very fascinating to me. It wasn't really just sex, obviously. And as I say, I really don't, when I'm making the movie, I'm literally not thinking at all about my other movies. Really. She was a very underrated actress, and that proved to be the case. She's incredibly well prepared. And we discussed, of course, particularly the hysteria. She comes to the clinic suffering from hysteria. We know that she had been already kicked out of a couple of asylums because she was uncontrollable. She was dysfunctional. She really couldn't function. And we had to show that. And so it's a question of level. How far do you go with that? In fact, we were really being rather subdued compared with what those patients really went through. And we have records of that. We have photographs that were taken by the French psychiatrist Charcot, who was a mentor of Freud's, and he specialized in hysteria. Hysteria was considered to be a disease of women, particularly. And the word comes from the Greek word meaning uterus. And in fact, they often remove the uteruses of women in order to cure them of this disease, which seems rather barbaric to us now, but they thought that was a reasonable thing to do at the time. Well, we have, as I say, we have the photographs of Charcot's patients, and we also have footage of Charcot's patients as well. And in addition, we have 50 pages of Christopher Hampton found this in the basement of the Bergholzli Clinic, 50 pages of Jung's analysis of Sabina, including his handwriting in the margins describing her symptoms in great detail, what her face was doing, the contortions of her face and so on, face ravaged by tics, he said. So we had all this accurate information about that. And then in addition, I said to Kira, you are a woman who is being asked to describe things which are unspeakable to you, because a young woman, she's 18, she comes from a wealthy family, to say that I masturbate because I'm sexually aroused by my father beating me, this is unspeakable. This is something that was not accepted. And here she is trying to speak it because she's being asked for the first time. This is Freud's talking cure. She's being asked for the first time to say these things, these unspeakable things. In the Bergholzli Clinic, which was very advanced for its time, and it really was like the Garden of Eden for crazy people. I mean, they had gardens, they did have orchards, they had forest trails that the patients could walk through, and gazebos for them to look over Lake Zurich and so on. They played music, but the one thing that they didn't have was people listening to them. No, you're crazy. Why would we listen to what you say? Here was Freud saying, no, listen to them because they will tell you what's wrong with them, and they will tell you how to cure them. So here is Sabina for the first time being asked to talk about these fantasies and her sexual reality. And part of her desperately wants to speak it and wants to confess it, and then part of her feels it's intolerable and vile and repulsive and she should not say these things, is trying to pull it back. So I said to Kira, I think it really, as is in other cases with these patients, they should all be around your mouth and jaw. You're trying to deform the words so that they're not understandable and so on. So that was the basis. And Kira is, you can talk to her about those abstract things, and then she can find a way to embody it. And that's her brilliance as an actress. And you can see all the way through, that's always there. Even as she becomes a substantial professional person, much more in control of her life, married, pregnant, there's still that volatility, that fragility underneath the surface. It's a really beautiful performance.